McColgan here.
Hello.
Exactly.
I gotta sell it.
very kindly here is here to talk about his book, A House Restored, about his historical house in Pembroke, Mass.
Pembroke, yes.
Yeah, which I think all of us next time we're driving through Pembroke are going to sort of, you know.
I haven't got to the exterior yet. Don't drive
that's
by.
All right.
Don't drive by.
Weirdly, you're going to see all these people like sort of peeking in your windows. Yeah, no, we're really excited to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
As some of the other authors in the room, I'm thinking, you know, Bob McColgan here can testify. When you write a book, all you want is people to read it, and so you go out and you flog it and make sure that people buy it. We have copies at the back. We're going to buy some. I'm going to buy one. The Historical Society is going to buy one. But anyway, they're available there. If anyone didn't bring their wallet, I will cover you and then, you know, and then hound you later. But anyway, I'm going to hand over to Lee.
Perfect.
Thank you, Lee, for being here tonight, and I'll leave it to you.
They're awesome. Well, hello everybody. Thank you for having me. So the book, it's part memoir and it's part history. So it's a little bit of a different spin. So it's not local to Pembroke history. There's a little bit about who built the house, but I really wanted to write this book with the idea that it would be more appealing to a broader audience. So I'll start with why I wrote the book. So I work in the preservation trade. Before I clean up well, I know. I'm a contractor, not an architect. Bob was like, what, are you an architect? No, I'm not. I work in the trade. It's probably because I started my career in the financial service industry. Do we have any finance people here? No, former finance people? Okay, that's good. Because I like to point out.
Well, I have a checkbook.
What's that?
I have a checkbook.
He's got a checkbook. So I worked in finance for 16 years, you know, through the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis debacle, Occupy Wall Street, and you realize it's pretty easy to vilify people in Wall Street as a bunch of greedy fat cats. That's not the case for me, but I have met those types of folks. And I walked away from all that because I fell in love with historic architecture, and I love building, and I always, as a kid, I was always building and making things. And I thought, very naively, that when I got into historic preservation, that everybody in small towns across the state, across the country, was going to appreciate their historic buildings and want to save them. And it's not the greedy, bad, horrible people that just care about money. And what did I find out when I got into this? Does everybody want to save their old buildings in these towns? No.
Sadly, no.
So you realize that for those of us that believe in saving historic architecture and see a value in that, every building is a fight. In Pembroke, I was on the board of our historic society. I think in the last 10 years, something like 3 18th century houses got demolished. All we can do is put a moratorium on it, wait a year, and that's it. So why did I write this book? The very idea of this is to create more advocacy for historic preservation, because there's a couple ways we can do it. We can either try to create laws and regulate, and then you would have some things to say about that. And that works, and that can be effective, but that's a fight, and that makes people angry when you tell them what they can or can't do with their house. I like to, you know, kind of win people over. So my approach was, well, let's build advocacy by, let's tell a good story and see if we can just engage people in the conversation and draw attention to it. So this book, it's part history, it's part memoir. So it's a little bit of my story, kind of leaving this corporate world and getting into this world of historic preservation. The characters are very, very different than who I used to deal with, as you can all imagine, as you all know. But it really is focused on the building history of an 18th century house. So there's some of it, it's part memoir, part kind of technical building history, but it's not about Pembroke, it's not about the people that had the house built. It really is about the materials of building the house and kind of my adventures trying to restore this house. So, what's the story? Well, there's the house. So, does anyone read any Nathaniel Philbrick stuff? So he did In the Heart of the Sea, which Ron Howard made a movie out of. He did Mayflower, best-selling history author out on Nantucket. So I got to meet Nat once. That was a treat. That's my wife and I with Nat. Before he was a best-selling history author, he wrote a local history book on Nantucket called Away Offshore. It's not one of his more well-known books, but I was doing some work out there for a contractor, and had picked up a copy of it and was kind of thumbing through this. And we just bought this house, and I just got into this world of preservation. And as you know, when you go to fix or restore a historic house, there are lots of different ways you can do it. Has anyone seen the show Houses with History? Jenny and Mike from Full Circle Homes on HGTV. I got on an episode of that. It was kind of fun. Yeah, because they were doing a lot of filming in the South Shore area. They're in our area. And we know, my wife and I know Jenny and Mike. But, you know, and I love what they're doing, because these are houses that are probably going to be demolished otherwise, and they're buying them and they're fixing them up. But they're really doing, it's a renovation show. They're kind of remodeling these things. My approach is, I'm more of a true historic preservationist. My approach to, and listen, anything that can save the building is good for me, from my perspective. But I really have that in-kind approach. So we bought this old house, and this was before I had, I'd been going to house museums and reading up and studying, but I hadn't really done a little bit woodwork stuff, frame and panel, furniture stuff, but I hadn't gotten that deep into the preservation world just yet. So early on, there was this thought of, well, what's the best way to restore this house? And I came across this great, I'm going to read it. I came across this account of a builder named Richard Macy, and his grandson had written the account after he had passed away, but Philbrick finds it in the library and then puts it in his book. He highlights Macy as a builder in this book about Nantucket. So this is written by Richard Macy's grandson. His practice was to bargain to build a house and finish it in every part and find the materials. The stones he collected on the common land. If they were rocks, he would split them. The lime he made by burning shells. The timber he cut here on island. The latter part of his building, when timber was not easily procured of the right dimensions, he went off island and felled the trees and hewed the timber to the proper dimensions. The ironwork he generally wrought with his own hands. Thus being prepared, he built the house mostly himself. Wow. And so this was an 18th century builder. And I get this crazy idea that what will I do? This guy could do all that stuff, the kind of yank of all trades. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to restore this stuff, and I'm going to do all of it, and I'm going to do it the traditional way, using traditional methods and materials, and I'm going to learn this, and it's going to be this great adventure. And that'll be easy, right? Yeah, guess what? It gave me a book. It gave me a pretty darn good story. So that is really, part of it is kind of following the footsteps of this builder. There's another reason I wanted to highlight Richard Macy, and I'm still... Another interesting fellow I met. I met Warren Buffett once. If you're going to meet Warren Buffett, it helps if you're dressed up as Warren Buffett. And that's a longer story. Yeah. But I don't know if anyone's followed Berkshire Hathaway, but Charlie Munger, his longtime partner, just passed away, just almost 99 years old, maybe 100. So did anyone read that shareholder letter that was publicized out there? I don't know if you would follow that. So he was using this as a metaphor to talk about Charlie Munger being the architect of Berkshire Hathaway. But I read it recently, and in there he's got this line. He says, in the physical world, great builders are linked to their architect, while those who had poured the concrete or installed the windows are soon forgotten. And this is true. Builders, there's a lot of talk about marginalized groups and who's been kind of glazed over in history. And one of the groups that I don't think gets talked about enough is builders. You think about a lot of these historic houses, even the house that we own, guess whose name goes on it? The wealthy English guy that had it built, not the builder. And that's just the way, I think about it. Are there any famous builders? The architects, we all know Frank Lloyd Wright. When you think about who is a famous builder in history, do any names come to mind? I think of Bob Vila or Norm Abrams. But generally, historically, builders don't get a lot of credit. They're one of the marginalized groups that doesn't get talked about. So I really wanted to I found this account of a traditional builder, and it's about his life and his story, and I said, I want to bring this to the attention of folks out there and readers, and let's give some builders some credit. So part of it, it's really me kind of following the footsteps of this 18th century builder trying to do what he did. So I'm going to let me tell one story, and I'll see where we're at with time, and if you want me to keep going, I can tell a couple of stories in the book. But why don't I start with one, and then we'll see where we're at. Okay, so this was the kitchen. This was probably built in the, we guess, I haven't done dendrochronology on it because my money is better spent fixing stuff than paying people to analyze wood samples. And maybe you have felt that same way, maybe dendrology, I don't know. But I didn't get too caught up in that. We think this is probably early part of the 19th century. So this was the kitchen, and this whole, you can't see all the brown paneling, but this whole thing was covered wall-to-wall paneling. 50s, 60s, 70s, just paneling everywhere. So I said, and I had a home inspector go through this, I had poked around, the attic up above it was sealed off. I had a preservation contractor that I knew go through it. And I was thinking, okay, this definitely needs, we're going to do some cosmetic work, we're going to preserve the original fabric of the building, but I'm going to get, this is a place I'm going to start, and I'm going to get into this, and it's just going to be some light cosmetic. Let's get the paneling off, let's see if there's some plaster walls under there, let's fix this kind of scarf joint in the middle with this beam, we'll do some light cosmetic work, we'll spruce this thing up, won't be so bad. How does that usually go? Is that how it goes? No, everything takes, my rule of thumb is everything takes double, sometimes triple what you think it will, and costs double, sometimes triple what you think it's going to cost. That is my rule of thumb. I got a lot better at pricing jobs once I figured that one out. That took a little while. So there was one, so the beams are exposed, there's paneling everywhere. You can't see it, it's the only picture I have of the old kitchen before we did the work on it, but there's one corner where the framing too was dubiously covered over in paneling. And again, you couldn't get up to the attic crawl space. It was all nailed and boarded off, so nobody got up above there to see anything. That should have been alarming to me, to all of us, and it wasn't. Why is that one section of the frame covered in paneling too? That seems odd, but I didn't think about that. So I grabbed my crowbar, and I'm all excited, and we just moved into this house, and I'm prying away, and I'm popping the paneling, is, you know, that old veneer paneling, crackles and pops, and nails are coming up. And this thing opens up, and I find, this is a little further down in the process, but essentially the whole corner is a gaping hole. It's gone. It looks like, no, it's all of it. The rafter down, there was part of the post there, it's taken out at that point, but the whole corner is gone. It's just dust.
Dust.
Yeah. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm thinking, I mean, this was one of those like, how the hell is the house not falling down on my head? This was a literal throw the crowbar on the ground, clang, run out to the barn, rummage for some scrap wood, and come back in with some 4x4s and stuff them under these posts. And it's like, whoa, what the heck? What I realized is sheeting boards are far more structural than you might think. So essentially, the sheeting boards were holding this whole corner of the frame up. Is anyone familiar, any timber framers? Does anyone know a lot about timber framing or even a little bit about it? Not a lot. Good. Read my book. You'll learn a lot about it. Okay. So, you go over to this English-built house. You go over to Europe where, buildings obviously are much older. You see much more elaborate timber framing is elaborate compared to stick framing a building today. But the timber frames here are fairly straightforward when you see some of the more elaborate joinery that's done over in Europe. But the corner, does anyone know what this is called? Or what architectural historians call it anyway. I don't know what it was called back then. So they call this the English tying joint. So everyone's familiar in the 17th or 18th. Mostly it was dying up in the 19th century. Some 19th century houses. You see the big what they call gunstock posts, right? The English call them jowl posts. So they're fat on the top and they taper down. There's different styles. They're splayed. They're truncated. So the reason that extra material is there, which makes it look like the gun stock stuck in the ground, the reason the extra material is there is because it's the convergence of these components, and you need the meat. Because is everyone familiar with a mortise and tenon? So the analogy I always use is like a plug in a socket. So the tenon or the tongue is the part that, like the prong in a plug, plugs in, and the mortise is the hole, and you plug them together. And with timber framing, you plug them together, drill a hole, and then hammer a peg through there and holds the whole thing together without nails. A very, very durable way to build. So you've got the wall plate, which is the beam running parallel with the eave. You've got, this is the tie beam coming in. You've got two tenons there. You've got a dovetail joint. All of that interlocks together, and then you've got this rafter that's tenoned in, and it's all pegged together. Really, really durable way to frame a house. And that's why, you know, these properly maintained timber frame structure, if the bugs don't get it, can last for centuries. I think the oldest timber, this is in the book, the oldest timber frame in the world is from like the 7th century. It's in, it's somewhere in Tibet. It's a wood-framed house that's still standing. You know, the stick frame stuff out of 2x6s that we're nailing together, none of us will be here, but those things aren't going to be lasting thousands and thousands of years. And you can debate the merits of cheap and fast or building things to last. And so, some of the book is, I sprinkle in a little bit of just my philosophy and kind of thinking about that. So that stuff's in there too. So it's a little bit of all of that. But I bring this up because this is, as one of the more elaborate components of the framing, as someone that's sort of just getting into this, that wants to be self-reliant like Richard Macy did it all himself, staring at a gaping hole and looking at the framing, it's a little intimidating. So I'm already deviating and changing my plan. So I'm thinking, you know, maybe I should go talk to a timber framer. So then the question is, where do you find a traditional timber framer? There must be, do you work with timber? You must work with some timber framers.
I don't know.
Who are the names around here for timber framers? I don't know. I don't know.
John.
Your guy.
Well, I didn't have any name, either way, I didn't have any names at this point in time.
Sure.
This was 7, 8 years ago.
Sure.
So I had remembered going to Plymouth Plantation, or now Plymouth Pawtuxet, was once Plymouth Plantation as a kid, and I remembered seeing all those reproduction framed houses, and I said, well, maybe I can go down there and learn something. So I go down there. Has anyone been there in a while? Everyone's been there before, right? Has everyone been there? So, and I don't know what's changed because I haven't been there in a while too, but costumed interpreters that are given a character. They're one of the passengers on the Mayflower. And their dedication to interpreting that history is, at least it was at the time, pretty serious. So these people are told not to break character. So I go down there and I'm poking around and I'm trying to get anyone to talk to me about the historic houses and how they're built and just have a normal 21st century conversation. And I can't get anyone to break, it's just that they won't engage. And it's just like, oh, this is ridiculous. So finally, there's this woman in, you know, she's got the felt hat on and the linen, the whole thing. And she sort of, I think she's eyeing me and she sees this and I think she feels bad. And she kind of pulls me aside. And it was like one of those, like, she's looking around. Right? Hopefully no one is watching me because I'm about to have a regular, you know, modern day conversation. And she says, the person you need to talk to is a guy named Michael Burry. She said he built most of these houses and he knows everything. And I said, great, how do I find him? She said, he doesn't work here anymore, but she had a number for him. So she gives me a number, I go on my way. So Burry is, I think there's a picture of Burry. So this is in Boston. Michael currently, and was then, still is the preservation carpentry instructor at North Bennett Street School in Boston. So that's the oldest trade school. And you've got modern carpentry there, you've got preservation carpentry there. So he does a lot of stuff, but he's a timber framer at first. So I tracked this guy down, and I would say luck, maybe not lucky in hindsight. It turns out he takes on an apprentice every year, and just for the summer in between school, and he hadn't found one yet. And here I am, all full of energy. And, oh, great! You know, I'm going to be a timber framer. I'm going to timber framing. So he agrees to take me on as an apprentice. By the way, and I'm coming from financial service, and I'm not not the Wall Street fat cat, but I was doing okay. To basically working for free. It is like an internship. Go work with Michael Burry and become a timber framer. So I spend a summer doing that and learning the basics. And this is all in the book, so I won't give you too much of detail. But when I learn what I need to know, I go back and I get to work. And again, I'm trying to be Richard Macy. So I want to do this. I want to do this the old-fashioned way. Has anyone ever hewed a beam before? Have you seen it done before? There's usually demonstrations at a lot of these things. Have you ever seen a beam hewed before? No? Hands? Yeah, a couple of people have. Okay. So, I wanted to have what they would do in the 18th century is they used a double beveled hewing axe. So it's got bevel on both sides, and it would leave a little scallop in the surface of the wood. And they weren't that, it's funny, they were really fussy about some things and then not fussy about other things. So that was something that they would just leave that unfinished. And then other, I've seen some weird things where, joinery is cut to perfection and then you just leave, these massive scallop marks. It was just interesting, the tolerances, and I've always found that fascinating. So I wanted my repair pieces to match exactly what's there. So my original idea, what do you think my original idea is, being a purist, is to go back in the forest behind the house and do what? Cut a tree down and do that, yeah, that was the idea. And very quickly said, no, that's not happening. But I did still want to have the scallop marks in there, so I ended up finding a sawmill and having a beam cut that was bigger, so it had extra material on it, so then I could hand hew it and give it the finish, at least. So, the process of this, for anyone, some people know, the process of this, for anyone who doesn't know, this is in, does anyone read any old Eric Sloane books? Yep. His illustrated books? So this is from an Eric Sloane book. Okay. So what they used to do, and I always think about this too, because they were probably wearing shoes like these leather bottom shoes with no tread. I think of every time, it's funny, I always come back to the shoes, because all these trades, I'm always like, they're probably doing this with like leather, like no grip. This just seems very, very dangerous. But they would hop up on the beam first with a felling axe, and they would cut, it's called joggling. I've heard some people say juggling, but I would say joggling. It's J-O-G-G-L-I-N-G, I believe, don't quote me on that. But essentially they would hack little notches to sever the cellulose fibers in the wood about a foot and a half apart down the line, and then they would hop off the log and take a broad axe next to the beam, then cut those sections in between each notch, and the wood just kind of pops off. And and then they flip the side and then to go around and hew the beam. So that's what I want to do. Let me tell you something. When you hop up on a beam and you haven't done a lot of this stuff, and you've got this, look at that on the top. Now picture me doing this. So you're standing on a beam with a big felling axe, and you got to cut right in between your feet. That is an unnerving thing to do if you've not done a lot of that. So I'll never forget in the book too. I don't want to give too much of the story away. I get up on the beam, and I'm looking down, and I've got this axe, and I'm having this, you have these moments in life, you're like, how the hell did I get here? Where the hell has life got me here? So I'm up there, and I got the axe, and I'm looking down, and then this image pops into my head of me. I just picture, and maybe I'm just a warrior. I just picture like lopping off a toe. What am I going to do if that happens? And I got this image of me crawling around on all fours in the grass, like looking for the bloody toe, and trying to calm it. I think, oh my God, I got my toe off. So I get up there, sweating, and I'm like, what the hell? And I lift this thing up, like, a medieval executioner, gonna lop off a head, and it comes down. And the axe, I still have all my toes, by the way, but the axe hits the wood and it skips. I don't get a nice clean, oh crap. So let's get down off the beam, all right, whew, take a breath, get back up there again, and cuts right in. And then you just start going. And then before you know it, first the cuts aren't even, and then after you just start going down the line, you just start getting more control. So I end up cutting all these notches, I hop down, I get my broad axe, I kind of figure that out. And I work this whole thing. I'm studying the English tying joint and joinery. And I get to a point where I've got my beam to look fairly close. It's pretty darn close. So I called some friends. I met some folks from the North Bennett Street School, a couple students. I needed a little help with the raising. I called them. And the great thing, if you really want to save, if you really believe there's value to saving the historic fabric of these buildings, you use, the beam is rod on the end, but that doesn't mean you have to replace the beam, the whole beam. So you cut a series of these are called scarf joints. So essentially I maintained all the original joinery as it would have been cut, the English tying joint, that's called the teasel tenon on the top, the dovetail, the whole thing, scalloped to match the finish of the framing, and we cut and fit all these scarf joints, and that's time consuming because you'll One, it's easy to cut the new piece that's on the ground, but then you need to match up the joinery, a bladed scarf joint or whichever scarf joint you want to use. You got to match up the joinery. You have to cut the joinery into the beams that are on the, in the air. And in this case, propped up with my 4x4s. So you get saws and steel saws and things upside down over your head. So we cut all these pieces, and it's a lot of test fitting. Slide it in and where's it binding, and pop it back out, and shave a little more off with your chisel, and back and forth, and finally pop this whole thing in, and we got that done. So that is, it's one of the stories. So I'll shift back to kind of the structure of the book. So this will give you an idea if you buy the book. We'll encourage you to buy the book so we can spread the word. Really, the book is about what I've identified as 6 materials. And each chapter is one of the materials used to build a house in the 18th century. And every chapter follows the exact same structure. It's me. Some people write these kind of fixer-upper books as I shouldn't even be, using tools, and they get into it, and the end of the story, it's like, and I became a builder, and I kind of learned something. My story is the other way around. I'm the overconfident guy that's like, I can do all this, and then I get into it, I'm like, crap, I can't do this. What am I doing? So every chapter follows the same pattern, which is, So here are the materials: wood, lime, iron, stone, glass, and brick that I've identified. We get this repair done, and life is looking good. And I go into the bathroom, I wash up my hands, and I, looking in the mirror, make sure I get all the dirt out of my face, and then I look behind me and I see a spot on the plaster behind me. What the hell's that? I look, is that a bug? It doesn't move. What is that? Crap, it's mold. I saw mold on that. Oh, somebody had replaced the original lime plaster, which is caustic, by the way, naturally antifungal, and put in some drywall board. Let's restore the original plaster seal. And then that takes you to the next chapter. So then the next chapter is about working with traditional lime-based plaster. In every chapter, I have to go off and find one of these modern-day builders and learn from them, and then come back and figure it out and fumble through until the next calamity happens. So that's the book. I'll talk a little bit about preservation, and then I'll pause. We'll see where we're at with time, and I can tell more stories if you want, or we can call it a day there. So it's coming up on 8 o'clock here.
I think you're going to get some good questions.
Okay, yeah, maybe why don't I hit these last couple points and we'll kill it there. And I don't want to give too much of the book away too. And then we'll take questions. So, from what I've learned about this is the biggest, when it comes to traditional building, because I've met people that, I've been a contractor for 50, 60 years. But if you're a modern construction person, you could be a construction person for 50, 60 years and built wood framed houses your whole career and never actually done a timber frame, and maybe know nothing about timber framing. It's just, I've just found the longer I've done this, they're just 2 different animals. Sometimes, unfortunately, the preservation people, they're always just on the fringe of the construction trade. A lot of them came out of the back to the land movement. They're usually hard to track down. They're not, it's always the small, 3 people on the beat up old truck, and you can never get them to show up. I understand the frustration of trying to track down and work with preservation people. I've been on both ends of it, by the way. I get that. I will say, though, if you can find someone that really knows old houses, if you're dealing with a museum property, you want to find that person if you can, because it's just a different way of building, and you could work in modern construction for years and years and years and not really understand traditional building. So if I'm going to summarize what I think the biggest difference is, it's right here. So all these materials that I mentioned, everything, it's permeability. Everything is porous and permeable because we're dealing with minimally processed natural materials, wood and brick and stone and lime and all that. And what that means is, you don't have moisture barriers on the ground. Now there's the negative, right? When it rains and you live in one of these old untouched houses, hello. When it rains, if you don't have your dehumidifiers on, it gets clammy and damp, and we've got a study that's got books on the shelves, and guess what happens to the pages of the books every time you get rain? They're wavy, and you'll get mildew on the surfaces. Before we have company, we got to run around and wipe everything down. I also understand why people don't want to deal with living in an untouched historic house. But this is the thing with these materials. So when it rains, wood shingles and stone and wood siding, it soaks up a little bit of water, and then the sun comes out and it evaporates back out and never gets trapped. So they're permeable. And if it's good quality wood, I've seen buildings that have been left in disrepair, a nice quality piece of oak that's just sitting out there, a hole in the roof, rained on for 30, 40, 50 years, and sometimes it goes. I've seen cases where as long as it just keeps drying out, it's fine. Today, we don't build houses that way. We put moisture barriers on everything, so we seal everything up with non-permeable materials. The ice and water shield, we're laying that stuff down before pouring floors. We're using, Portland cement, and that's fine too. There's not one problem with one or the other. Where you get problems is when you start mixing the two. So what happens is people that don't understand the permeability concept and how old houses need to breathe, and they only know moisture barriers and sealing everything up, start sealing everything up on all these old houses, but moisture tends to find a way in. If you've got moisture coming up from the basement, it's going to get in, or hot and cold temperatures are meeting. You're going to get moisture, and in some cases, you've now trapped it. And then what happens is you end up accelerating the deterioration when you think you're not. So one of the biggest examples I see of this a lot is when people repoint traditional masonry. So on these 200, 300-year-old houses, if original brick survives, one, it was fired at really low temperatures, so it's going to be softer than a modern day brick anyway. And two, if it's been sitting out for 200, 300 years, it's going to be weathered. The mortar they used was really lime-based mortar, so it's not Portland cement. It's made and fired at really high temperatures. It dries really fast. It's hard. It's not super permeable. They used to use mortar that came from they would take seashells essentially and burn them and break them down and turn into a putty, add sand and horsehair, and they would do all the basics that way. And that's a soft material. So here's the thing with permeability. If you've got old soft brick, you want your mortar, if there's movement or shifting, you want your mortar to fail first. You want the pressure on the brick. Portland cement is much harder than old soft brick. What happens is a lot of people repoint these things, repointing, chipping out all the old mortar and putting new mortar in, and they'll point with modern day Portland cement on this old soft brick. And that does two things. There's two problems. One, it creates a bunch of plugs. So when it rains, the brick soaks up all the water. It should be evaporating back out through the soft lime mortar. Now what you've done is you essentially plug that exit point for the water. The brick soaks up this water, especially around times where you have freeze-thaw cycles. Now water is trapped in the brick. And what happens when it freezes? So the bricks will spall. Sometimes even the face of the bricks just pop completely out because the water expands when it freezes. You don't want water trapped in the brick. Old soft mortars would prevent that. So one of the bigger issues I see a lot in preservation is modern day masons come in and they repoint all this old brick and old masonry stuff with modern cements, and then it ends up creating all these extra problems. So understanding kind of that permeability issue and the difference between an old house and the old way of building and the modern way of building is really important. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to make one final point, put my quote in here. Why does preservation matter? And this is one of the philosophical points I touch on. On a long enough timeline, we're all going to be gone, right? On a long enough timeline, all these buildings are going to be gone. Do I have time for one more story? Rolling? Just rolling. One more story?
Are you kidding? You got
It's in the book too. I'm giving it away, but so I actually opened this when I worked in the finance world. I was given a territory. I was out in the Midwest. And I lived in Nebraska for a long time. Strange place for New England. Cornhusker State. So anyway, I had a meeting. I used to drive around and do all these meetings, and I had a meeting canceled. And I went to get a coffee, and I'm sitting in my car, just reading the emails or waiting for my next meeting. And I just looked over, the building next door is advertising this open house, and they had these Buddhist monks from Tibet that were doing these sand mandala paintings. Anyone familiar with this? Okay, I knew nothing about it, but I'm sitting in my car. I'm like, yeah, I would walk in and check it out. Walked in, poked around, checked it out, and left and forgot about it. Weirdly, that would end up sticking with me, and now it's in my book. So these Buddhist monks, I'm not a Buddhist, by the way, couldn't tell. No robes here. It was just an interesting philosophy. They travel around the world and they demonstrate this art of mandala. And what they do is they make these really elaborate sand sculptures. They draw out this geometric shape, and I don't know light history on it. It's represent a deity or the universe or something. I don't get too far into that. But essentially, for days on end, they hunch over these things with these little funnels, and they tap colored sand onto this board with this pattern scribe, and they make this kind of sand overlay, this colorful sand. And they demonstrate this and people come watch it. And then when they're done with it, guess what they do with it? They sweep it up and they go dump it in a river. And they just endlessly do this. And it's this exercise of kind of accepting impermanence of all things and not getting attached to things. And theoretically, you can deal with loss if you're not attached to something. And I brought that up and I think about it a lot because I get into this stuff. And what am I doing? I'm doing the opposite. I'm like, we can't let these old buildings, we gotta save all the old buildings, you bulldoze one, what's, oh my God, you lose your life, we gotta save them. That's why they call us the hysterical society sometimes. I get it. So there's this bigger question, and this is something I've thought a lot about. It's like, why? If it's all gonna be gone a long time, why the hell does it matter? My answer, guess what? I'm not the Buddhist. My answer, it does matter. And I won't give all the reasons away. You can read the book. But it does matter. And really, I kind of explored my reasoning for why I think doing it matters. And on a more philosophical level, I found this great quote. This is a professor at a college out in Colorado. This is like a small college. I don't even know where I found this quote, but this woman wrote this article. Her house had burned down. She kind of wrote this article kind of talking about that. And she had this quote, my house is not just a thing, it's an extension of my physical body, my sense of self, that reflects who I was and I want to be. And if you want to get more philosophical, the things we own, clothes we wear, they're reflections of who we are. And there's this question of what do we want our towns, the houses that we live in, they're reflections of who we are. And what do we want as a community? What do we want our buildings to say about it? Do we care about our culture? Do we care about our history? Or do we just bulldoze that and put up another shopping mall? Is there value to that cultural heritage? Is that a reflection of who we are as a community? Do these things matter? I think they do. Most of my favorite places to go, not just in this country, the most visited destination in the world, I think, is Paris. People go there, and what do they marvel at? All this beautiful old historic architecture. There's all this architecture and culture and food, and people like that. Yet the same people that will appreciate that will look at a 300-year-old house that maybe needs some work and bulldoze that and put up a, it's moldy, put up a new thing. I think culturally we lose a little something. So they're reflections of who we are in a way. What do we want our towns to say about us? So I'll get off my philosophical soapbox.
Sorry, you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah, I know. That's why I come to speak. So I'm preaching to the choir. I'll get off my soapbox. You all get it. Do we have any questions? Do you have any questions?
I got one. Out in Nantucket, Richard Macy. Was that related to R.H. Macy, Macy's department stores?
So if you read, I think it's In the Heart of the Sea was Philbrick's probably, I think that's his best-selling book. Don't quote me on that either. But there were like six English families that they were Quakers. Everyone's a Coffin, a Macy, Chase. There were a handful of names where it's they did this. I think it is the same family that descended from there. But yeah, the genealogy stuff is not really my thing.
Did you know his first department store was in Haverhill, Massachusetts?
I did not know that.
Oh, I know about that.
Yeah,
yeah, and then I went to New York from there. But no, you did a good job. This is,
I think it is the same. I think it's the same Macy's. Yeah, there are like six families that all those names got spread.
Tommy, you
when you talked about the various materials you're working with, I feel I have a somewhat rudimentary knowledge about some, but the one that intrigued me most was the one about glass.
Yeah.
And that definitely is a specialty, and of course glass in the 18th century was, or in the 17th century was a very rare item. So I'd be interested in your comments on that.
Yeah, so by the way, I had considered it. I did not blow the glass and make a paint. I considered it. I thought of it. Every part of this is like, how far do I want to go? You can go all the way in. And that was one where with the project it turned out to be like, we can't go that far. But I did go down to the glass museum, and I don't know, there's a company, I think, there's a company out there that makes a reproduction. So it's called Crown. Is everyone familiar with Crown glass? People call it bullet glass. So my understanding of the process is essentially they start with a hollow tube. Glassmaker starts with a hollow tube. They blow it like they're going to blow, you know, hollowware, a vase or something, and then they sit it down. It starts with an M. It's in the book. The little chair they sit on, and they spin it out. They switch it to it's called a punty. It's just a not hollow metal rod. They switch the the gob of molten glass onto this punty, and they spin the thing out, and they roll it out into this big disc. I've got a picture somewhere in my phone of someone making crown glass. So it's the analogy that I use. It's like the base of a wine glass. So you got the stem, and then it flares out, and then it's round.
Yeah.
So they would roll that out. I think they wouldn't just let it cool. They would anneal. There was some kind of annealing process, reheat it, cool it again, something to do with making it brittle. And glass, it's silica, potash, and then they would add lead. Without those additional additives, it would be too brittle. The Sandwich Glass Museum, which is in there, that's a really good place to go learn everything you haven't been.
Field trip.
So I went down there and asked them, does anyone make real, true reproduction crown glass? Bullet glass, because it's got that, when they break it off, they've saved that piece in the middle that's got the little crown in it. That's why it's called that. Because there's a company that makes a reproduction glass, and you go to some of the bigger historic sites. I went to one in DC, and they're like, oh yeah, we had this done at all this historic reproduction glass. And it's not, it's got all this weird wavy lines in it, but it's not, crown glass is very specific. The way they roll it out, it looks like a record. If you took a record and then broke it into small pieces, and it has all those little grooves and those bubbles and imperfections and all that. Yeah, this company I saw, you're watching Pirates of the Caribbean, you're watching one of these Disney movies, you see the old wavy glass. It's some kind of weird reproduction that's not accurately reproduced crown glass. Now, this is back to how much of this really matters. I don't know. For me, I've clearly gone way too far down the rabbit hole. It's like, to me, it's these little subtle things that are what create this character. So if we want to maintain that character, well, let's go as far as we can with this stuff. But yeah, I ended up in finding salvaged crown glass is hard. You can find a lot of wavy glass. So cylinder glass, so later in time, they essentially would create a cylinder like a vase, and then they would heat it, cut it, and kind of roll it out. So then glass technology evolved. So you'll see, when you get into the 19th century, you see wavy glass, but you don't see, they weren't blowing it and rolling it out. You'll see waviness, but you see the lines go away. It's getting harder and harder to find crown glass, and sadly a lot of it gets thrown in. I mean, Anderson and Pella, and you get millions of advertisements. I mean, this stuff just goes in the dumpster. You can see me driving down the street, and windows stacked up on a telephone pole, and the house is getting, I'm in the light. Is that wavy or is that not? All right, take that, because they're not making that anymore.
Yeah.
But I rarely find crown glass. You can go to one of these architectural salvage places and probably find it. But it's getting harder and harder to find. So I worked for a guy that just mostly did windows, and he had a piece that ended up using.
Is it possible today to buy wavy glass?
To buy it?
Yeah.
Well, just that. I'm unaware of anyone doing a really high quality reproduction crown glass. I'm sure someone is out there, but I've not come across it.
No, I think if I'd buy some if I could.
Yeah.
I have one of my favorite subjects. I haven't had it for years, but I used to get these telemarketers call. They were selling windows.
Yeah.
How old are your windows? And I say, oh, run around 250 years.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, you must need new windows. Well,
Yeah.
nowhere in the world,
Yeah.
because about 40% of my window panes are wavy.
Yeah.
I need some glazing done.
And again though, it's a little detail, but when you start adding the rosehead nails and wavy glass and track marks from a plane and peen marks from a blacksmith's hammer, when you start adding all that little stuff up, you realize it does create this kind of unique character. And early 20th century, the idea of doing the pilgrim houses, there was lots of sort of Disneyland stuff done to these places, like let's make it look old, and it didn't really. Something does get lost there too. The thing about this house that we got, I was really looking for something that was largely untouched, which we found. Blessing and a curse, right? It's been largely untouched. that means it's got a lot of problems, but a lot of the original building fabric was there, and I tried to maintain as much as possible. But yeah, window glazing, and I get it, you know, I understand why. Now the other thing is we've got energy efficiency and regulations around that. I mean, I understand why people take these old windows out. Just don't throw them in a dumpster, find a preservation person and, you know, stash them in an attic or something. But, you know, the great thing about that old glazing putty, which is just whiting, which is essentially marble dust and linseed oil, I always say there's a strength and a weakness. So in time it will crumble apart, break off, and flake off. But the advantage of that is, and trust me, I've reglazed a lot of windows where someone's put a modern day, like a silicone, which I'm even seeing shops that do historic windows using that stuff more and more. They're getting away from using the traditional glazing putties, Sarcos and whatnot. The problem with that is you go to get the glass out and save it, and it's harder and harder, and sometimes you break more panes, and the strength and the weakness is that that stuff does crumble away. As long as you maintain them, it's easy to get the glass back out intact. It's easy to restore the sash. It's easy to put it all back together. And if you just stay on top of the maintenance, these things can last for centuries.
It's designed to be repaired.
Centuries. Manage that. Yeah.
Weedy glass, I was telling you about a house that caught on fire I was working on. So I don't know where they got it from Maine, but they went and they restored a huge Victorian down in, I think it was a Victorian, down in Brookline. I was rewiring. Yeah. And the owners, they installed, I don't know how many windows they installed, and the owner didn't like it. It was a little too wavy. So they took it all out. And this was hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of glass.
Yeah.
Took it all out, replaced it all, and then the house caught on fire. Oh. It was almost all done. You know what do firemen do with windows? With their axes?
Oh.
Smash.
Yeah.
They smashed a bunch of that stuff out, you know, and then they had to put it all back together again. So it was like three different sets of windows.
So you still have some distance to go on your house, correct? In terms of
the lesson learned is that it doesn't ever end.
It
never ends. It doesn't end.
Line.
Yes, it doesn't end.
So the question is, if you ever did though cross the finish line, wouldn't you want to find another house to work on, or have you already perhaps considered the second project is your wife then planning to leave you?
Would I do this all again?
I don't know. I was thinking.
It's a fantastic question. If I were to do it again, now when we were looking too, my original thought was Cape House. This is something where if I could get on, it'd be easy for me to get on a roof. If I had to do chimney maintenance, we ended up finding the big 2-story Colonial that was pieced together over the years, and by the way, I bought this sight unseen. My wife, I was still finishing up the work I was doing in the West. She moves back. She's hunting for places. I hear 1702. I hear, largely untouched. Phone goes through it with the phone. I'm like, I don't need to hear anything. I sent some friends I knew through there. I bought it sight unseen. I don't regret that. Would I do it again? Probably a smaller house, but the reality of it is, I don't think this will ever be, unless this book becomes a New York Times bestseller and they make a movie out of it. Yeah. I hope it does. Probably not going to happen. It's an issued subject. You never know. Unless that happens, though, and I'm going to keep picking away with the time and budget that I have. I mean, I could work on this forever. I could work on this for as much time as I have.
So a quick follow-on question.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've learned so much in terms of your internship and just your own personal research and sort of on-the-job training and site visits and so forth. Do you think it would, have you considered going back and getting like a master's degree in historic preservation? Do you think that would be a value, or?
That's a good question too. Because this is when it comes to learning, this is what I've found. It
doesn't matter in a sense. Do you think people would, for example, would it matter career-wise, since essentially you started a second career?
Yeah, probably. And I saw that in the finance. People get into finance and then they would get all that. They used to say alphabet soup on their business cards. That does go somewhere. Well, I probably wouldn't do that. What I found personally is, so how I started it. Is anyone familiar with? Does anyone know who Abbott Lowell Cummings was?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
So he wrote a book. He's passed away. I never got to meet him. He passed. I think it was the early '90s. And I was just getting into this, and then he passed away. I never got to track him down. He wrote a book called The Framed Houses of Massachusetts Bay. I think he wrote that. That's in the book too. He wrote that in the 60s or 70s or something, maybe 60s.
Yeah.
Somebody gave me a copy. That really turned this on for me. So somebody gave me a copy of that, and it highlights a lot of the museum houses in the state. And I just started going long before I got fully went into this. Was probably, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. I just started going to these places and poking around and pestering tour guides to let me go up in attics and basements and just studying it. And it was funny. The more I learned, it started out with I was interested in timber framing first. The more I learned about the different materials, I just went further and further down the rabbit hole. I go back to the same. I would go in and just look at. I spend an hour looking at the timber frame, and then I'd leave. And then I learned about windows, and I go back and but it's like anything. The more you know, the more you appreciate something. Mm-hmm. And it just I could go back to these places. The more I learned, and just go step into this house with a completely fresh perspective. I found that. So I started there, and then I started tinkering with reproduction furniture work, and then I started, buying all the. You go through this phase where you buy every book on the subject, and then do that, and then you get into you do it. So to me, the best way to really know these things intricately is this kind of three-legged stool of. I go study physical examples of these things, which for me, this is more selfishly for me. If we bulldoze these things, we lose. There's an academic value to saving these things for people to study this stuff. And there's still things these old buildings can teach us. Building, some things have improved in terms of doing things cheaper and faster. Don't get me wrong, living in a new house is much more comfortable than living in an untouched house. But, a timber framed house of oak compared to a modern, some stuff that is quality-wise has gone way downhill, a lot of it. So I think that there are a lot of things that these houses can teach us. But to me, this combination of studying the surviving examples, reading extensively, and then going out and actually doing it and realizing, like, holy crap, this is, with the three-legged stool there, to me, you get this kind of complete knowledge of it. And I'm sure I could learn something if I went back to school, but
You'd rather roll up your sleeves and get your
just keep
dirty.
reading on my own, doing it,
and great.
And it's probably the best way for me. Cool. Anything else?
I wonder what this would look like if they restored.
All right, here's my close. This is the sales guy, sales guy in me. Listen, I'll come full circle to where I started. I wrote this book. Everyone here, I'm preaching to the choir. I was told we're all in the same boat. I wrote this book because I want to create more advocacy for historic preservation because I think it means something. Everyone here does. Younger generation. I go to a lot of these historic societies, a lot of these meetings. We don't see enough young faces. We need to see more. I am trying to get people excited about this topic. I have a book that is not specific to just. There's potential to probably Eastern Seaboard, but we're trying to promote this thing nationally. I've got Roy Underhill from PBS's Woodwright Shop wrote the forward. I've got Kevin O'Connor from This Old House did one of the blurbs. I'm trying to get people excited about this. I need a platform. I need help. What I need from you, if you believe that preservation matters and you want to help me, one, buy the book, because that's the only way I can continue to do this. Two, maybe you'll read it and don't like it. Well, if you have an old house, make good kindling to start your fire in your heart. Buy, you'll find insulate, you need drafty windows, stuff some paper in there, You'll find a use for the thing. Buy the book. If you do like it, and I think you will, I need you to spread the word. You can help me get the word out. Refer, tell people, tell them to find it, tell them to buy it, tell them to find me on social media, whatever you're doing, spread the word. That's the only way we get more people excited about this. If more people are interested in this and are paying attention, that's what gets them to open up their wallets and pocketbooks. That's how we get funding, and then that's how we get people behind saving these buildings instead of fighting people and developers in our town that just want to knock these things down. But we've got to build momentum, and that's what I'm trying to do. I need your help. Buy the book. Tell people about it.
All right. Thanks, Lee.